Marcus Thompson pushed open the wrong door in a rush. The hospital room was cold and silent. A woman lay pale against white sheets, her eyes closed, her breathing shallow. No flowers on the nightstand. No cards. No one waiting in the chair by the window. He stood there holding sunflowers meant for someone else. Without thinking, he set them down and left. He didn't know that small mistake would pull him into a life he never planned, that the wrong room would become the right choice, that dying alone could still mean learning to live. Marcus Thompson wasn't the kind of man who wandered into places by accident. He kept his life narrow and controlled. Work, his daughter, nothing else. The hospital visit that afternoon was already pushing the limits of what he allowed himself. An old college friend had been admitted for surgery at Riverside Medical Center, and Marcus had promised to stop by. He didn't like hospitals. The smell alone brought back memories he'd buried 3 years ago. He parked in the visitor lot and walked through the automatic doors with a bouquet of sunflowers he'd picked up at the grocery store. The flowers felt ridiculous in his hands, too bright against the gray hallways. He checked the room number his friend had texted him, 3rd floor, room 314. He took the elevator up and stepped out into a corridor that smelled like disinfectant. The hallway stretched out in both directions, identical doors on either side. He turned left, counted the numbers, 310, 312. He stopped at the next door, nudged it open with his shoulder, and stepped inside. The woman on the bed didn't move. Her eyes were closed, her face so pale it nearly matched the pillowcase. Dark braids spread around her head like she'd been arranged that way. The room was quiet except for the soft beep of a monitor beside her. Marcus stood there confused, his brain catching up slower than it should have. This wasn't his friend. This wasn't even a man. He glanced at the door. No nameplate, no chart hanging outside. He turned back to the woman and noticed the rest of the room. Empty. Not just empty, abandoned. No flowers, no cards propped on the nightstand, no jacket draped over the chair. No one had been here. Maybe no one was coming. Marcus didn't know why he stayed. He should have backed out, found the right room, laughed it off later. Instead, he looked down at the sunflowers in his hand. They were too cheerful for wherever he was supposed to be anyway. He set them on the small table beside her bed, quiet as he could, and left without a sound. He found his friend 2 doors down. They talked for 20 minutes about nothing important, and Marcus left the hospital thinking he'd forget the whole thing by morning. He didn't. 3 days later, Marcus was back at the hospital. Not for his friend this time. He told himself he was just curious. He wanted to know if the flowers were still there, or if someone had finally shown up. He didn't plan to go inside. He walked past the room once, glanced through the small window in the door. The sunflowers were still on the table, wilting now. The woman was awake, staring at the ceiling. Marcus kept walking. He made it to the elevator before he stopped. He stood there, hand on the button, and felt something shift in his chest. It wasn't pity. Pity was easy to ignore. This was something else. Something that reminded him of sitting alone in his kitchen 3 years ago after the funeral when his daughter had finally fallen asleep and the house had gone silent. He'd wished just once that someone had left him flowers. He turned around. This time, he didn't go in. He found a nurse at the station and asked about the woman in room 314. The nurse looked up from her computer, hesitant at first, but Marcus's face must have convinced her he wasn't a threat. Jasmine Brooks, the nurse said. Her voice was soft, like she was used to delivering bad news. She's been here 2 weeks, stage 3 lymphoma. She's responding to treatment, but it's slow. Marcus nodded. He didn't ask the question he really wanted to ask. The nurse answered it anyway. No visitors, she said. Not one. Marcus left the hospital and sat in his car for 10 minutes before starting the engine. He didn't understand what he was doing. He had a daughter to take care of, a job that barely paid enough. He didn't have space in his life for someone else's tragedy. But that night, after he put his daughter to bed, He sat at the kitchen table and made a list. Small things, things that wouldn't mean much to anyone else, but might mean something to someone alone. The next day, he brought a book, a paperback he'd read twice and liked enough to pass on. He didn't go into the room. He left it with the nurse and asked her to put it on the table. The day after that, he brought a small potted plant, then a blanket, soft and gray, then a card with a landscape on the front and nothing written inside. He never stayed. He never introduced himself. He didn't want credit. He just wanted her to know that someone was thinking about her, that she wasn't as alone as that room made her feel. 2 weeks passed. Marcus kept coming. He started to recognize the nurses, and they started to recognize him. One of them, an older woman named Evelyn, smiled every time she saw him. She never asked why. She just took whatever he brought and promised to leave it where Jasmine would see it. Marcus didn't know if Jasmine noticed. He didn't know if she cared. He told himself it didn't matter, but every time he walked away from that hospital, he felt a little less hollow. Then one afternoon, Evelyn stopped him before he could leave. She had a strange look on her face, not worried exactly, more like she was holding back a secret. "She's asking about you," Evelyn said. Marcus frowned. "What do you mean?" "She wants to know who's been leaving things for her." Marcus felt his stomach tighten. He hadn't thought that far ahead. He hadn't planned for this to become real. "What did you tell her?" he asked. Evelyn shrugged. "I told her I didn't know your name, but she's getting better. She's sitting up now, talking more. She might be discharged in a few weeks." Marcus nodded slowly. He didn't know what to do with that information. Part of him wanted to disappear before it got complicated. The other part wanted to meet her to see if the person matched the quiet image he'd built in his head. He didn't decide right away. He left the hospital and drove home, picked up his daughter from school, made dinner, helped with homework. Normal life. Safe life. But that night, lying in bed, he kept thinking about what Evelyn had said. She's getting better. He'd started this because she was alone, because no one should go through something like that without knowing someone cared. But now she was asking questions. Now she wanted to know. The next day, Marcus brought a small journal, something she could write in if she wanted. He handed it to Evelyn like always, but before he could leave, she shook her head. "You should give it to her yourself," Evelyn said. Marcus stared at her. "I don't think that's a good idea." "Why not?" He didn't have an answer, at least not one that made sense out loud. Evelyn just smiled. "Room 314. She's awake." Marcus stood there holding the journal, feeling like he'd been cornered. He walked down the hallway slowly, stopped outside her door, and looked through the window. Jasmine was sitting up in bed, reading the book he'd left 2 weeks ago. Her hair was pulled back, and she looked stronger than the first time he'd seen her. Still pale, still thin, but alive. He knocked softly. She looked up. Their eyes met through the glass, and for a moment, neither of them moved. Then she smiled, just a small one. But it was enough. Marcus opened the door and stepped inside. "Hi," he said. His voice came out rougher than he meant. "Hi," Jasmine said. She set the book down on her lap. "You're the one who's been leaving things." It wasn't a question, but Marcus nodded anyway. "I wasn't sure you were real," she said. "I thought maybe the nurses were just being nice." "They are nice," Marcus said. "But no, it was me." Jasmine looked at him for a long moment. Not suspicious, just curious, like she was trying to figure out why a stranger would do something like this. "Why?" she asked. Marcus didn't have a good answer. He thought about lying, making up something simple. But standing there, looking at her, he realized she deserved the truth. "I walked into the wrong room," he said, "and you were alone. And I guess I just thought no one should be that alone." Jasmine's expression didn't change, but something in her eyes softened. She nodded once, like she understood more than he'd said. "Thank you," she said quietly. Marcus held out the journal. "I brought this in case you wanted to write or draw or just have something to do." She took it from him, ran her fingers over the cover. "I used to write," she said, "before all this." "Maybe you still can," Marcus said. Jasmine looked up at him again, and this time she smiled a little wider. "Maybe?" Marcus didn't know what else to say. He felt like he'd crossed a line he couldn't step back over. This wasn't anonymous anymore. This was real, and real meant complicated. "I should go," he said. "Will you come back?" Jasmine asked. Marcus hesitated. He thought about his daughter, about the carefully controlled life he'd built to protect them both, about how easy it would be to say no and walk away clean. "Yeah," he said. "I'll come back." And he did. Marcus came back the next afternoon. He told himself it was just to check in, but when he walked into her room and saw her sitting up with the journal open on her lap, he realized he'd been looking forward to it. That scared him more than he wanted to admit. Jasmine looked up and smiled. It was a small smile. Careful, like she wasn't sure how much energy to spend on it, but it was real. "You came back," she said. "I said I would," Marcus replied. He stood near the door, unsure whether to sit or stay standing. "You can sit," Jasmine said, like she'd read his mind. "I don't bite." Marcus sat down. The room felt smaller with both of them in it. Jasmine closed the journal and set it aside. "I started writing again," she said. "Just a little. I forgot how much I missed it." "What do you write about?" Marcus asked. Jasmine looked out the window. "Things I notice, small things, like the way the light hits the wall in the morning, or the sound of footsteps in the hallway. Things that remind me I'm still here." Marcus nodded. He understood that more than she knew. After his wife died, he'd done the same thing, not writing, but noticing, counting the small details of the day just to prove time was still moving. They talked for 20 minutes. Nothing heavy. She asked what he did for work, and he told her he managed inventory at a warehouse. She asked if he liked it, and he said it paid the bills. She didn't ask about his personal life, and he was grateful for that. He wasn't ready to talk about his daughter yet, or about why he was alone. When he left that day, he felt lighter, but also more tangled. He'd started this to help someone. Now, he didn't know what it was becoming. Over the next 2 weeks, Marcus visited 4 more times. Each visit felt easier. Jasmine was getting stronger. Her color was coming back. She could sit up longer without getting tired. The nurses said her latest scans looked promising. The treatment was working. She might be discharged by the end of the month. Marcus should have been happy for her. He was, but there was something else underneath. A quiet dread that once she left, this thing they were building would disappear. One afternoon, Jasmine asked him the question he'd been avoiding. "Why don't you ever talk about yourself?" she said. Marcus looked at her. She was sitting cross-legged on the bed now, stronger than she'd been in weeks. Her eyes were sharp, direct. "I talk about myself," Marcus said. "No," Jasmine said. "You talk about work, about the weather, about the cafeteria coffee. But you don't talk about you." Marcus shifted in his chair. "There's not much to say. I don't believe that." He looked down at his hands. He'd worked hard to keep this part of his life separate, but Jasmine wasn't going to let him hide. "I have a daughter," Marcus said finally. "Her name's Zoe. She's 8. Jasmine's expression softened. "You're a dad?" "Yeah. Where's her mom?" Marcus felt the familiar tightness in his chest. "She died 3 years ago. Cancer." The room went quiet. Jasmine didn't say she was sorry. She didn't offer empty comfort. She just looked at him like she understood, like she knew what it meant to lose something you couldn't get back. "That's why you were here," Jasmine said quietly. "That's why you walked into the wrong room." Marcus nodded. "I was visiting a friend. But yeah, I don't come to hospitals unless I have to." "And you kept coming back," Jasmine said, "even though it probably hurt." Marcus didn't answer. He didn't know how to explain that helping her had been easier than sitting alone with his own grief, that for a few minutes every week he got to focus on someone else's survival instead of his own loss. Jasmine reached over and touched his hand just briefly. Then she pulled back. "Thank you," she said, "for staying." Marcus left the hospital that day feeling raw. He picked up Zoe from school and took her to the park. They sat on the swings and she told him about her day, about the spelling test she'd aced and the boy who'd pulled her hair at recess. Marcus listened and tried to focus, but his mind kept drifting back to the hospital, to Jasmine. That night after Zoe went to bed, Marcus sat at the kitchen table and stared at his phone. He thought about texting Evelyn asking how Jasmine was doing, but that felt like crossing another line. He set the phone down and went to bed. He didn't visit the next day or the day after that. He told himself he was busy, that Zoe needed him, that he was getting too involved. But the truth was, he was afraid of what it meant that he looked forward to seeing Jasmine, afraid that he was starting to feel something he had no right to feel. On the fourth day, Evelyn called him. "She's asking for you," Evelyn said. Marcus's stomach dropped. "Is she okay?" "Physically, yes, but she noticed you stopped coming. I think she's worried you're not coming back." Marcus closed his eyes. "I'll be there tomorrow." He showed up the next afternoon with a bag of books he'd picked up from a used bookstore. When he walked into her room, Jasmine looked up with an expression he couldn't read. Relief, maybe. "I thought you disappeared," she said. "I'm sorry," Marcus said. "I got caught up with things." Jasmine nodded, but she didn't look convinced. "You don't have to keep coming. You know that, right? I'll be okay." Marcus set the bag of books on the table. "I know, but I want to." Jasmine looked at him for a long moment. Then she smiled. Good. They fell into a rhythm after that. Marcus visited 3 times a week. Sometimes they talked. Sometimes they just sat in comfortable silence. Jasmine told him about her life before the hospital. She'd been a freelance graphic designer, working from home, keeping to herself. She didn't have family nearby. Her parents had died in a car accident when she was in college. She'd had friends once, but over the years, they drifted. By the time she got sick, there was no one left to call. Marcus told her about Zoe, about how hard it had been to raise a daughter alone, about the guilt he carried for not being enough. Jasmine listened without judgment. She didn't try to fix anything. She just let him talk. One afternoon, Marcus brought Zoe with him. He'd been putting it off, but Zoe had started asking questions. "Where do you go on Thursdays? Who are you visiting?" Marcus had run out of excuses. Zoe walked into the hospital room with wide eyes, holding Marcus's hand. Jasmine smiled at her from the bed. "You must be Zoe," Jasmine said. Zoe nodded shyly. "Your dad's told me a lot about you," Jasmine said. "He says you're really good at math." Zoe's face lit up. "I got 100 on my last test." "That's amazing," Jasmine said. "I was terrible at math." Zoe giggled. Marcus watched them talk and something in his chest loosened. Zoe asked Jasmine about the hospital with the blunt curiosity only kids could get away with. Jasmine answered honestly but gently. By the time they left, Zoe was chattering about how nice Jasmine was and when they could visit again. Marcus realized driving home that he'd let this become part of his life, part of Zoe's life. And he didn't know if that was a mistake or the best thing he'd done in years. 2 weeks later, Jasmine was discharged. The doctor said her scans were clean. The treatment had worked. She'd need follow-up appointments, but for now, she was in remission. Marcus helped her pack the few things she'd accumulated in the hospital: the books, the blanket, the wilted sunflowers she'd kept in a vase even after they dried out. "What are you going to do now?" Marcus asked. Jasmine folded the blanket carefully. "I don't know. Go home, I guess. Try to figure out what normal looks like." "Do you have someone to help you?" Marcus asked. Jasmine shook her head. "I'll be okay. I've been alone before." Marcus didn't like the sound of that. He thought about her going back to an empty apartment, recovering alone with no one to check on her. It felt wrong. "You have my number," Marcus said, "if you need anything." Jasmine smiled. "I know." They exchanged a few more words, and then Jasmine left with a nurse to finish the discharge paperwork. Marcus stood in the empty room looking at the bed she'd been in for weeks. He felt the weight of something ending, or maybe just changing. He didn't hear from her for 3 days. Then she texted him. Just a short message. "Made it home. Thank you for everything." Marcus stared at the text for a long time before responding. "Glad you're okay. Let me know if you need anything." He thought that would be it, that they'd drift into polite distance. But a week later, she texted again, asking if he wanted to meet for coffee. Marcus said yes before he could talk himself out of it. They met at a small cafe near the hospital. Jasmine looked different outside the sterile room, healthier. Her hair was longer, pulled into a loose ponytail. She wore a sweater that was too big for her, but it made her look comfortable, real. They talked for an hour, about nothing, about everything. Jasmine told him she'd been working again, picking up small freelance projects. Marcus told her about Zoe's upcoming school play. It felt normal, easy, like they'd known each other longer than a few months. When they said goodbye, Marcus felt something shift. This wasn't just kindness anymore. This was something else. Over the next month, they met for coffee twice more. Then Jasmine invited him and Zoe over for dinner at her apartment. She cooked pasta, and Zoe helped set the table. They ate together, and for the first time in years, Marcus's kitchen table didn't feel empty. But underneath the ease, Marcus could feel the fear creeping back. He was starting to care about Jasmine, more than he'd planned, more than felt safe. And every time he let himself feel it, he thought about his wife, about losing her. He didn't know if he could survive that again. One night after putting Zoe to bed, Marcus sat on the edge of his mattress and stared at his phone. Jasmine had texted him earlier, just a picture of a sunset from her window. He'd sent back a thumbs up, but he hadn't called, hadn't pushed further. He was afraid of getting close, afraid of what it would mean if he admitted he wanted more than friendship. The next week, Jasmine had a follow-up appointment. Routine scans, nothing to worry about, the doctors had said. But when Marcus texted to ask how it went, she didn't respond. He tried calling, no answer. He waited 2 days, and the silence felt like a weight pressing down on his chest. Finally, Evelyn called him. "Jasmine's back in the hospital," she said. Marcus felt the floor drop out from under him. "What happened?" "The scan showed something. They're running more tests. She didn't want me to tell you, but I thought you should know." Marcus hung up and drove straight to the hospital. He found Jasmine in a different room this time, smaller. She was sitting on the bed staring at the wall. When she saw him, her face crumpled. "I thought it was over," she said. Her voice broke. "I thought I was done." Marcus sat beside her and took her hand. He didn't have words. He didn't have answers. All he had was the choice to stay or leave. And for the first time in 3 years, he wasn't running. "I'm here," he said. "I'm not going anywhere." Jasmine looked at him, and tears slid down her face. You should. You should leave before this gets worse." Marcus shook his head. "No. I'm going to be a burden," Jasmine said. "I can't ask you to do this." "You're not asking," Marcus said. "I'm choosing." Jasmine closed her eyes, and Marcus held her hand while she cried. He didn't know what would happen next. He didn't know if the scans would be bad, or if this was just a scare. But he knew that walking away now would be the biggest mistake of his life. The tests took 3 days. 3 days of waiting while Jasmine sat in that small hospital room and tried to pretend she wasn't terrified. Marcus came every day. He brought Zoe once, and she drew pictures at the foot of Jasmine's bed, while Marcus read out loud from a book Jasmine had mentioned liking. They didn't talk about the scans. They didn't talk about what would happen if the news was bad. They just existed in the same space, and somehow, that was enough. On the third day, the doctor came in with results. Marcus stood up to leave to give Jasmine privacy, but she reached for his hand and held it tight. The doctor looked between them, then sat down and opened the file. "The scans are clear," the doctor said. Jasmine's grip on Marcus's hand loosened. She let out a breath she'd been holding for days. Marcus felt his own chest unclench. "It was scar tissue," the doctor continued, "from the original treatment. It showed up differently on this scan, which is why we flagged it. But there's no new growth. You're still in remission." Jasmine nodded, her eyes wet. She didn't cry. She just sat there absorbing the information like it was too big to process all at once. The doctor went over follow-up plans and left them alone. Marcus sat back down. Jasmine looked at him, and for the first time since he'd known her, she looked angry. "I can't keep doing this," she said. Marcus frowned. "Doing what?" "Waiting for the next scare. Waiting to see if it comes back. I can't live like that." Marcus understood. He'd felt the same way after his wife died. The fear that every cough, every headache meant something terrible was coming. It had taken him years to stop bracing for disaster. "You don't have a choice," Marcus said quietly. "You just have to live anyway." Jasmine looked at him, and something in her expression softened. "Is that what you did?" "No," Marcus said honestly. "I shut down. I stopped living for a long time, but I'm trying not to do that anymore." Jasmine reached for his hand again, this time slower, more deliberate. "Because of me?" Marcus didn't answer right away. He thought about the past few months, about how helping her had pulled him out of the fog he'd been living in, about how she'd made him want something more than just surviving. "Yeah," he said. "Because of you." Jasmine was discharged the next day. This time, Marcus drove her home. Her apartment was small and neat, filled with plants and books and the kind of quiet that came from living alone for too long. Marcus helped her carry in the few things she'd had at the hospital. And when he set the bag down, Jasmine turned to him. "I don't want to be alone right now," she said. Marcus looked at her. She wasn't asking for anything specific, just presence, just someone to sit with while the fear settled. "I'll stay," he said. They sat on her couch and talked until it got dark. Jasmine told him about the years before she got sick, about the friends she'd lost touch with because she'd been too proud to ask for help. Marcus told her about the months after his wife died, about how he'd barely kept it together for Zoe, about how he'd convinced himself that being alone was safer than risking loss again. "But you're not alone anymore," Jasmine said. Marcus looked at her. "Neither are you." Something shifted between them in that moment. Not a declaration, not a promise, just an acknowledgement that they'd both chosen to stay when leaving would have been easier. Over the next few weeks, Marcus and Jasmine fell into a new rhythm. He still visited, but now it wasn't about checking on a patient. It was about spending time with someone who understood him. Someone who'd seen him at his most vulnerable and hadn't run. Zoe started calling Jasmine by name instead of Dad's friend. Jasmine started keeping extra snacks in her apartment for when Zoe came over. One Saturday afternoon, Zoe asked Jasmine if she wanted to come to her school play. Jasmine looked at Marcus, uncertain, and he nodded. Jasmine said yes. She sat in the audience between Marcus and an empty seat that used to belong to his wife. And when Zoe came on stage dressed as a tree, Jasmine clapped louder than anyone. After the play, they went out for ice cream. Zoe ordered chocolate with sprinkles and talked non-stop about the performance. Jasmine listened with the kind of attention that made Zoe glow. Marcus watched them and realized something he'd been avoiding for months. He was falling for her. Maybe he already had. That night, after Zoe went to bed, Marcus sat on his porch and called Jasmine. "Hey," she said when she picked up. "Everything okay?" "Yeah," Marcus said. "I just wanted to hear your voice." There was a beat of silence. Then Jasmine laughed softly. You saw me 3 hours ago. I know. Another silence. This one felt different. Heavier. Marcus, Jasmine said carefully. What are we doing? Marcus looked out at the dark street. I don't know, but I don't want to stop. I'm scared, Jasmine said. Me too. What if it comes back? Jasmine asked. What if I get sick again and you're stuck with me? Marcus's chest tightened. Then I'm stuck with you. That's not fair to you, Jasmine said, or to Zoe. Let me decide what's fair, Marcus said. Jasmine went quiet. Marcus could hear her breathing on the other end of the line. I care about you, Marcus said. I didn't plan to, but I do. And I'm not walking away because you're scared. I'm scared too, but I'd rather be scared with you than safe and alone. Jasmine's voice cracked when she spoke. I don't know how to do this. Neither do I, Marcus said. But we'll figure it out. They stayed on the phone for another hour, talking about nothing and everything. When they finally hung up, Marcus felt lighter than he had in years. The next morning, Jasmine showed up at his door. She looked nervous, her hands tucked into the pockets of her jacket. I want to try, she said. I want to try this with you. Marcus smiled. Okay, but I need you to know that I might mess this up, Jasmine said. I've been alone for a long time. I don't know how to let someone in. That's okay, Marcus said. We'll figure it out together. Jasmine stepped forward and kissed him. It was soft and tentative, like she was testing whether this was real. Marcus kissed her back, and for the first time in 3 years, he didn't feel guilty. He didn't feel like he was betraying his wife's memory. He just felt like he was allowed to be happy again. Over the next 6 months, they built something real. It wasn't perfect. Jasmine had bad days where the fear crept back in, and Marcus had moments where he retreated into himself. But they learned to talk through it, to be honest when things were hard, to ask for help instead of pretending they were fine. Zoe adored Jasmine. She started asking when Jasmine was coming over, started including her in drawings she made at school. Jasmine bought Zoe a sketchbook and taught her how to draw basic shapes. They spent hours at the kitchen table together while Marcus cooked dinner and tried not to think about how much this felt like a family. One evening, after Zoe had gone to bed, Jasmine and Marcus sat on the couch together. Jasmine had her head on his shoulder, and Marcus was half watching a movie neither of them cared about. I've been thinking, Jasmine said. About what? About the future. Marcus's heart picked up. What about it? Jasmine sat up and looked at him. I know this is fast. I know we've only been together a few months, but I don't want to waste time pretending I don't know what I want. Marcus waited. I want this, Jasmine said. I want you. I want Zoe. I want to build a life with you, however long I get. Marcus felt something catch in his throat. Are you asking me to marry you? Jasmine smiled. Maybe. Is that crazy? Probably, Marcus said. But I don't care. They got married 3 months later. It was a small ceremony in the backyard of Marcus's house. Just a few friends, Evelyn from the hospital, and Zoe, who wore a yellow dress and carried a bouquet of sunflowers. Jasmine wore a simple white dress, and Marcus wore a suit he'd bought the day before. There was no big speech, no grand gesture, just 2 people choosing each other in front of the people who mattered. When the officiant asked if they took each other, Marcus said yes without hesitation. Jasmine said yes with tears in her eyes. Zoe clapped so loud everyone laughed. After the ceremony, they cut a small cake and ate on paper plates in the grass. Zoe ran around with the other kids, and Jasmine leaned against Marcus's shoulder. I never thought I'd get this, Jasmine said quietly. Me neither, Marcus said. Do you think it'll last? Jasmine asked. Marcus looked at her. I think we'll fight for it. And that's enough. Jasmine kissed him, and Marcus wrapped his arms around her. He didn't know what the future held. He didn't know if the cancer would come back, or if they'd have 50 years together or 5. But he knew that walking into the wrong room had been the best mistake of his life. Because sometimes, The wrong turn leads you exactly where you're supposed to be. Sometimes, kindness doesn't need a reason. Sometimes love isn't about perfect timing or perfect people. It's about choosing to stay when it would be easier to leave. It's about showing up day after day, even when you're scared. Marcus had spent 3 years running from the possibility of loss, but Jasmine had taught him something he'd forgotten, that life wasn't about avoiding pain. It was about finding someone worth risking it for, and she was worth it. Zoe ran up to them, out of breath and grinning. "Can we have more cake?" Jasmine laughed. "Yes, absolutely." Marcus watched them walk toward the table together, and he felt something settle in his chest. Not certainty, not the promise that everything would be okay, just the knowledge that he wasn't alone anymore, that he'd found his way back to living, and that was enough. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the yard. The guests were starting to pack up, and the music had faded to a soft hum. Marcus stood there watching his daughter and his wife laugh over frosting, and he made a silent promise to keep showing up, to keep choosing love even when it was hard, to keep walking through the wrong doors until he found the right ones. Because in the end, that's all any of them could do. Keep moving, keep hoping, keep believing that the next room might hold exactly what they'd been looking for all along.